So, this is kind of a part two to the feminine spectrum. Last post, I discussed how men relate to the feminine spectrum. Uh, then I talk about a woman's relationship to her own feminine spectrum. Uh, I guess uh, this may seem odd, your relationship to your own femininity. A lot of people identify themselves as whatever their spectrum expression is. But in order to be flexible and develop yourself, just to understand that you don't need to lock up your personality. It keep You always keep evolving, keep finding out new dimensions of yourself. So don't need to lock yourself down in some rigid identity. But I guess if you were to approach development, it's the first thing I would just recommend is just to understand where you're at on the spectrum of expression of emotional mind orientation. So what this represents is the variety of the emotional mind, and depending on how oriented you are, how deeply rooted you are in the emotional mind, it just determines kind of where you're at on the spectrum. So I guess three orientations I would focus on here: Nora Jones, Charlotte, and Carmen Electra. Nora Jones is the more balanced archetype, so just much more calm, much more rational, logical, has a much more chill vibe. The two, so she's more brain balanced. Uh, Two other archetypal feminine are Charlotte and Carmen Electra. What is Carmen Electra is, and I don't want to make any kind of value judgment because each has their challenges, each has their strengths. So, but these are good contrasts for femininity. One is the more idealistic feminine. So Charlotte's highly integrated, highly oriented in her right brain, emotional feminine expression, idealistic, but and high ideals, high values. So that's a positive. A downside you could say is, Freud would say she's top heavy on superego. Just kind of idealistic is a mixed word, and that's good because it can make you blind. Your idealism can make you blind. Also, while there's impulse control, there's also sexual repression in Charlotte, and you don't see Carmen Electra and Charlotte. They have complementing strengths and weaknesses. So so those are Charlotte's strengths. Carmen Electra, much more. She's right brain like Charlotte, but much more id focused. You could say, as Freud would say, just much more oriented in her actual sexual impulses, and which has strengths and weaknesses. She's not repressed like Charlotte. Much more independent, much more shrewd. Like her BS meter is probably the best of any woman on the spectrum. Whereas Nora is probably using her rational mind to discern BS. Carmen Electra just will know intuitively. So that's a strength for Carmen Electra. She doesn't repress her sexuality. On the other side of the coin, on a certain level, Charlotte's perspective on Carmen Electra is probably a little bit accurate. There's probably some selfishness going on there, probably some impulse control, challenges, delay of gratification, those kinds of challenges, and really anybody's gonna have their strengths and weaknesses. So I would just say respect wherever you're at, respect your strengths, respect your challenges, and that's probably the strongest starting point you can start from. So now I'm going to just kind of talk about how these three see each other, how they can grow from each other, those kinds of ideas. So let's start with the more balanced feminine. So Nora Jones, how she would see Charlotte, how she would see Carmen Electra. I guess Nora would be probably a little less judgmental, I guess. But in order, these tend to be the more business-oriented, modern woman, I guess you could say. But in order to move into that more rational, competitive environment, she was probably strongly reacting against these two archetypes. So if her mother was kind of like a Charlotte type, home body housemaker, she might have a strong reaction against that kind of impulse, that kind of archetype, not only outside of herself but inside herself. In order to stay competitive, in order to get through school, that highly rational, she had to stay focused. So there's probably going to be less partying, less sexual impulse orientation. So there can be repression in Nora too, and she can view Carmen as kind of like slutty and this kind of thing. It's important not to be too strong in your judgment. It's to be discerning, understand, appreciate genuine weakness, but also be fair about it. Appreciate the strengths of the feminine, whatever you're not necessarily expressing yet. Carmen's not integrated in her sexuality. She knows what she wants. She doesn't repress it. These are all powerful things to learn how to integrate within your own value from wherever you're at. Charlotte can be vulnerable. And even vulnerability can be strength. The ability to be open, and these are things that the more rational, balanced woman can have challenges with. So let's move on. How does Charlotte see Nora? How does she see Carmen? So again, there's going to be judgments of Charlotte as she's going to see Carmen as probably slutty, and see Nora as, maybe she's unable to attain that independence, and so she may feel insecure looking at her, may kind of look down on her from Charlotte's perspective. I guess when it's important to recognize, I guess, if you're strongly oriented and feminine, you're going to have more challenges with rational tasks, with any kind of strong, practical, procedural issues, challenges in life. The emotional mind deals with chaos much more better than any kind of orientation into a physical structure. So a series of rules, and the execution of those rules, the execution of so you wouldn't feel Charlotte be comfortable in a rigid environment like a bank, an accounting office, a SWAT team. That these are all very strict, rational, logical exercises, and Carmen neither. But if you want to be more balanced, it's good to open yourself up to those strengths, but not limit yourself. Not think that I can't do that. It's just going to take you longer to do what strongly rational, more balanced women can do. So don't limit yourself. Even though it does take you longer to do certain things, you have your own strengths. The emotional mind has its own strength when it compares to men, when it compares to men or women who are more oriented in their rational mind. So you're going to have more flexibility, you're going to have more variety, you're going to have more fluidity. So just respect your own strengths and respect, how you can grow, those kinds of things. While you'll see clearly the downsides of the Carmen Electra from Charlotte's perspective, you're going to see that she has probably impulse control, commitment control problems, delayed gratification problems. Also respect that she can probably teach you how to not repress your sexuality, how to have a healthy relationship, how to explore your own sexuality. I know this plays out perfectly in Sex and the City. There's one scene or one episode. I honestly haven't watched very many of them, but there's one episode that stuck out in my mind, which was Charlotte never really looking at her vagina. Like she took a hand mirror and put it between her legs, and she, ew, you know. But I don't know. Some sex therapists recommend having a healthy relationship to your vagina, looking at it, and appreciating it. So involves in learning how to reintegrate your sexuality, and but respecting also the value of commitment, um, but but knowing how to integrate your sexuality and express it in a healthy way. This can be something of a challenge for Charlotte or even for Nora, trying to embrace the positive aspects of Carmen. Another thing that Charlotte can learn from Carmen is the shrewdness. Um, Carmen is much more realistic, much more down to earth, maybe a little bit cynical, but also ability to see things as they are. If you're more an idealistic type woman, that's great that you can imagine beautiful outcomes, beautiful worlds, realities. So that's a powerful thing. If you're projecting that onto a situation and not seeing it as it is, you're vulnerable. So idealistic people can be very vulnerable. And so if you want to develop your strength, you can do that in two ways: by appreciating the other women on the spectrum, which is appreciating the rationality of a Nora Jones type, much more able to analyze the situation and see intentions. Another strength of how you can compensate for the weakness of the idealism is the Carmen Electra. She's able to shrewdly see a situation as it is, see people's intentions as they are. So those two strengths can compensate for the weak side of the idealism. But idealistic, it's a strength and a weakness. So respect the full expression of what idealism is and what it isn't. So let's move on to Carmen Electra. She's likely insecure when looking at Nora Jones, the more independent woman, the more intelligent, rational. So she's probably going to view herself as dumb. I know this is frequent for the tiger-like women, very oriented in their sexuality. It's important, I guess, if this is your orientation, to not get down on yourself. This is a highly masculine society, not really well suited for the feminine mind, not really well suited for the education and development of the emotional mind. So just understand that, again, you're probably going to be slower at some of the things that she's good at, but it doesn't mean that you cannot develop those aspects in yourself. But also know that the highly right-brained, shrewd, sexually integrated woman has its own strengths and weaknesses. So being able to absorb her strength and not limiting yourself, not seeing yourself as absolutely lower than the Nora Jones or how the independent women, intelligent women types, just see that they have strengths that you don't have yet. Is one way to look at it. Don't see yourself as dumb. That's important. That's a label that these women tend to see themselves as. Probably they repress it, but men also project that onto them. So that's something that you need to resist if you want to develop your own sense of balance. You're going to look at Charlotte and see her prudishness almost. You see her sexual repression. You're going to see her dependence, her weakness of dependence on a man. So you're going to be turned off by those things in Charlotte. Maybe these two women will tend to look down on each other. I guess it's important to see there's elements that, while on some level it's probably accurate, also to see that Charlotte has impulse control much better, delay of gratification, those kinds of things. And also just see how that integrates into your own overall long-term well-being. So developing the long-term perspective for the tiger-like woman, the more right-brain oriented women, that's one of the main key things for long-term well-being and development. So just I would say, wherever you're at on the spectrum, appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of everybody else on the spectrum, and you develop into a pretty healthy, balanced way. Thanks.